be outweighed by good. Now, I don't want people to think this is a trivial point because it might sound trivial at first, but think of the Lord of the Rings, for example. Let's just say that in that world, Eru Elivatar didn't create any suffering. This may sound trivial, but would anyone want to read that book? I think the answer is no. It would sound quite boring. And I think the reason for that is we recognize there is some sort of intrinsic goodness in the triumph of that story, of people overcoming the badness, that the triumph basically outshines any sort of suffering and puts it in a far better perspective that creates far better virtuous creatures than if it was a world just devoid of any sort of suffering. So you would also say that God has put in place something like a law of nature, which causes virtuous good to emerge from evil that can occur. Another way of thinking about it is that God, when creating this world, it issues a bunch of conditional decrees to the effect that if such and such evil happens, such and such greater good will result or ultimately outshine it in that sense. St. Augustine said it like this: since God is the highest good, he would not allow any evil to exist in his works unless his omnipotence and goodness were such to bring good even out of the evil. So the basic point is that I want to also circle back around to God's obligations. I think you and I might disagree on this point, but I would think it would be better if a world exists where there are virtuous people in suffering versus a world of no virtuous people and there's just pure pleasure or no suffering. And I think that the reason is because I think we acknowledge the existence of the fact that this world of lacking of pleasure, or this world that only has pleasure and doesn't have suffering, is far less intrinsically good than a world that does employ suffering to create far better, interesting, far better acts of triumph in creating virtuous creatures in that sense. So Trent Doherty talked about this